Good day, and welcome to this conversation on cash and carbon, making efficient financial moves to net zero. This is part of Economist Impact's fourth annual Countdown to COP event. I'm Phillip Cornell. I'm the Global Practice Lead for Energy and Sustainability at Economist Impact. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Sophia Mendelsohn, Chief Sustainability and Commercial Officer at SAP. There's a mounting pressure from stakeholders and increasingly stringent regulations that combine to push companies towards net zero commitments. But achieving a net zero economy requires a lot of investment. Estimates range up to $9 trillion annually by 2050. Given that scale, it's clear that efficient allocation of capital is not just important, it's critical. Efficient management of financial resources and environmental impacts can significantly influence companies' bottom line, but it's clear that doing good and doing well don't always align. Getting it right requires the right data visibility to understand where there are risks and where there are opportunities. So, how can the integration of carbon and financial data enhance decision-making at the board and C-suite level and lead to more effective transition plans? What are the practical benefits of creating things like a green ledger? And how can this approach foster a more sustainable and profitable business model? So, to discuss these questions, I'm so happy to be joined by my guest. Sophia has played a pioneering role in marrying commercial strategy and sustainability at SAP and has longstanding expertise in engaging and supporting senior decision makers. So, Sophia, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Let's start by discussing the challenge at hand. So, why are companies putting so many resources into navigating this net zero maze? And if it's a maze, is it a maze with a solution?
I think of it less as a maze and more of a marathon. And to make sure that those of us joining for this conversation really get the most out of it, please allow me to be very blunt. Companies are navigating this because they know for their employees, for their customers, and for their shareholders, they cannot be the one left holding the short stick. What we see across our customers and the many companies we engage with and help to run their businesses is they're aware that there are two types of risk coming. The first is physical risk, physical climate risk and natural resource constraint. And that is going to hit in the supply chain area of the value chain. And of course, has hit already in many, coffee being only the most recent and prominent example. The second is in financial and regulatory risk. That's where we really see carbon and even materials like plastic going from an externality or an input to a net new financial risk that sits on your balance sheet and ultimately needs to be accounted for and considered when communicating to your shareholders.
Great. So given that we have these two kind of risks, let's talk about how we address the problem of those risks. So what kind of struggles do companies and the sort of leaders that you're talking to, what do they face in terms of things like data visibility? And what data do they need to make more informed decisions about addressing those two risks that you described?
Yeah, not only in our conversations, but in multiple CFO, CEO interviews and surveys, you see that business leaders will articulate data availability, and if not availability, data quality as the number one barrier to making a change, a transition, or an investment. And as you said, Philip, with the amount of money on the table, both in regards to going in as an investment, as well as opportunity to be made in net new markets, no business decision maker will make a move on that level without data. And I think what's been missing in the conversation for the past decade, if I may, and what we can leapfrog as a problem to solution here at this climate week and at this upcoming COP is that data is already available. That sustainability data is business data. Sustainability data is business data. Business leaders already have access to their business data. It's in their enterprise resource planning system. On any given day, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of decision makers in any one enterprise using an enterprise resource planning, or ERP for short, system. What is missing is using that existing information, who you're buying from, what you're paying them, where's it coming from, what's it made of, putting that into sustainability, and then putting sustainability data into an ERP system at the point of decision.
So that data seems, that makes a lot of sense that the data is already out there. And it's just a question of how do we process it? And there's all sorts of really interesting technologies out there that are obviously helping us to navigate that sort of data, that sort of big data challenge. Can you talk a little bit about how we can integrate things like artificial intelligence, or is that really the right, kind of technology to be talking about? And more importantly, when you talk about suppliers, how do we look into the data that might be in a different part of the supply chain than a company normally has access to?
So if we take all the comments we've had to date in this short interaction, Phillip, and we can kind of lay out a 3-step plan, starting from the very first comment you made, doing good and doing well. I'd say the first step in this rethought plan is we're not doing good here. We are actually running our business, and we are running our business the way business leaders have always done that, with net new constraints. We have limited resources, increasingly so year by year, and the stable climatic environment that all business leaders and decision makers have enjoyed before us is no longer there. So if we look at this purely from a business lens, we immediately get to the second stage, which is the data stage, which is we're not creating net new concepts. We're not trying to count carbon in scopes 1, 2, and 3, which is not how money is counted. We're using the business data to work backwards to an emissions factor. So now we have the correct purpose and goal. We have the correct data. And 3, we have now net new tools. So to speak about AI, I actually think that sustainability and AI go extremely well together. And that's because experts who think about sustainability and energy, which of course you are one, are already used to thinking about complex, interconnected natural and industrial systems where if you make a change or choice in one place, you can get an unexpected and unpredicted consequence in another. And of course, that's what AI is so good at, right? AI in the hands of business users, and especially in the hands of sustainability leaders, can help them measure changes, measure integrations, optimize behavior, and predict outcomes ahead of time. So if we apply AI to sustainability, much like we would apply AI to truck route optimization, we can ultimately get things like better climate models, better wildfire forecasts, better predictions of what natural resources will be needed for what materials 5-10 years out, for example, for a circular economy.
Yeah, I've always really struck by the power of AI to do the kind of predictions and foresight that you're talking about. It seems like there's really a short-term and long-term problem here to overcome, right? So where there might be a clear business risk or opportunity and a climate change risk or opportunity, that sometimes those time frames don't actually match up. Can you talk a little bit about how we make them match up, and how do we overcome these short-term, long-term problems in decision making?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is, unfortunately, for all of us as community members, I think those timeframes are coming closer together, right? And we see that in the pinch in supply chain because of flooding in Asia, because of heat in Africa. So I do think that time frame is maybe the root issue of integrating sustainability, but that is becoming less and less of an issue. What AI can do and what AI can't do are also worth talking about in the context of time frame, right? Mm-hmm. AI is not a silver bullet. And we should remember that software and enterprise resource planning, did work, of course, before AI. But it's the integration of AI that should expedite solutions so that that AI should expedite solutions so that business decision makers can move faster through their process. So let me give some very concrete examples. What AI models can now do is map either emissions to natural resources and calculate in a matter of minutes what one design might be in regards to plastic use, carbon footprint, water use, versus another. And we have a customer doing this beautifully in the automotive sector today, live, right? And they're looking at how they design car seats. And within seconds, they're able to say, if we design it this way, we know this could be the carbon tax implications. Versus if we design it this way, we get lower carbon tax implications. And for those of your listeners who are not sustainability practitioners, doing one of those equations in the past was a minimum of 6 months, a minimum of $100,000, and based on estimates, spend. How much does the leather cost, not what went into produce the leather. So we've lowered costs, we've expedited on time, and we've increased accuracy. These are the characteristics that a CFO needs to see coming through if you're asking her to make a decision or sign off on an investment that would result in difference of material sourcing in the supply chain, for example.
Great. I want to go back a little bit to the kind of processes that are required. Maybe you can just walk us through a little bit of the steps of building a robust ESG foundation, so calculating carbon footprints, sharing it within the supply chain. And I do want to ask a little bit about this green ledger. Maybe you can describe a little bit what that is and how it fits into sort of SAP's overall approach.
Of course. And for your listeners who aren't living this day to day, I will just briefly start at the beginning, which is that what we've been doing to date, everything you've been seeing about in the headlines, is fundamentally the concept of what we call carbon counting. How much carbon do I estimate is in this based on how much I spend, multiplying and adding it up together. What we're pioneering here at SAP with our experience in the CFO's office is carbon accounting. So you're going from estimates to actuals. And I'm sure many of your listeners have had this exact experience in their own professional lives where at one point they're dependent on an outside consultant with a general view or an estimation based on the industry. And then they get the actual data, how their supply chain is reacting, how their customer or client base is reacting, and they can make much more accurate decisions. Exact same thing for carbon. And to give a very tangible example of this, when you're counting carbon, what you actually do is take how much money you spent and an estimate of the embodied energy, multiply them together and add them all up and break them down into what sustainability professionals call scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, which are basically an estimate of how close the emissions are to your business process. If you haven't heard of these as a finance professional, that's exactly the problem. So what we have done at SAP, which is extremely exciting if you've been in the space as long as I have, is create technology and software that takes the carbon counting in the scopes 1, 2, and 3 and translates it into the way data is organized for a CFO or other business decision maker, i.e. group level, entity level, country level, P&L level, and product level. That way, instead of saying we have a net zero goal under our brand name by 2050, the product owner is saying, this is how much it costs to make my product. This is how much embedded energy is in there. And if I lower it, this is what I think the green premium I can demand from my end consumer is, and or this is the tax liability I should expect when selling into the EU or China.
Well, listen, I'm really struck by our conversation, starting with what you said, that the data is already there, right? That it's inside our ERP systems. And that when you talk about counting, for example, the embedded carbon within a product that might be required to move that throughout the supply chain and address all of the different participants in that supply chain's own challenges, but also to address the challenges of new regulatory and trade regimes. And I think about, how, for example, carbon border adjustment mechanisms that are coming into force soon are going to require that kind of integration of the data from all those different players. And so there's really these sort of different kind of momentums that are pushing this at the same time. Listen, Sophia, it's been such a pleasure to have you with me today. So really, thank you again for joining me and for our audience at Countdown to COP.
Thank you. As I'm sure you can see, I'm extremely passionate about the topic and thrilled to be having the conversation with the Economist and your listeners.
Amazing. And thank you to our audience as well. Please stay tuned for the next session of Economist Impact's Countdown to COP, which will begin shortly. Thanks very much.